we are recording and we are going to have the real presentation start from here.
Okay. Can everyone see my slide that has the title?
Yes, Suzanne, we see your slide.
Okay.
Project. Okay.
Great. So we're so glad that so many of you decided to join us today. We're excited to talk about the mirroring project. And between the two of us, we've used it in class, online, with groups, with individuals. So whatever context you're in, you can most likely integrate the mirroring project. Many of you have already chatted out your role, your context, who your learners are. If you haven't, go ahead and still pop that in the chat. Okay, at any point. So who are we, the presenters? I'm Suzanne McCurdy, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota in their second language education program. And I plan to do my dissertation somewhere in the nexus between pronunciation instruction and adult basic education literacy learners. And adult basic education is where my background is. For about 20 years, I was a teacher trainer and embedded PD specialist in Minnesota. And I've created and co-led a great study circle that we have here, and that's also available online. If you want to know any information about that, contact me later. And I'll throw it to Colleen.
Yes, my name is Colleen Meyers, and I'm very excited to be talking to all of you today about the Mirroring Project, one of my favorite activities to do with students. A little bit about me. I'm retired now from the University of Minnesota, where I worked with international teaching assistants for many, many years, and also taught in the intensive English language program before that. But currently I'm still involved in pronunciation, teaching and training. I did a Fulbright in Turkey at the Middle East Technical Institute in 2007. And since then I've been back to give workshops in Turkey. I'm the author of several textbooks, and there's a book that's coming out. I can talk a little bit more later, but it's through Equinox Publishing, and it's about the Mirroring Project, actually looking at it from a second language acquisition perspective. And Elaine Tyrone wrote that section of the book, and then Darren Lescott and I wrote it as well. And finally, I'm a frequent pronunciation presenter. For the past several years, I've done the intonation segment of the Pre-Conference Institute, and then also at PISLT, as Marsha said, I've given presentations and teaching tips. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, and we've got us, and then we've got all of you here, and I see that we've got directors of programs, teachers, classroom teachers, tutors. Wow, we've got grad students, we've got retirees from college programs and university programs. And so we're all in good company here, Colleen.
Sounds like it, yeah.
As you might suspect, we have different types of learners from the who we work with. So in today's presentation, we'll try to draw on both of those types of groups because we know we have a wide range of teachers and directors and others here today. Of course, with ABE and my background, there's a mix of schooling backgrounds with our students, and their English language levels vary, their oral skills vary within classes and across programs. And for Colleen, oh, I think I'm supposed to say this, sorry. And for Colleen, in the university setting, works with many students who have a vast schooling background and have studied English formally. So we have that spectrum of students here. And I see that, again, even with you all, there's a spectrum. There are people who work with ITAs, people who are in adult ed like I am, someone in the EFL context, they're in China, people teaching citizenship, community college. So across the, runs the gamut once again. So we will try to keep that in mind, all the diversity we have in our room today.
Okay, so let's begin by talking a little bit about our objectives for today. So by the end of today's session, hopefully you'll be able to first describe the mirroring project and why it can be effective for practicing pronunciation. And also, we're going to try to discuss how it might be applied to your specific context. So I'm going to talk about a project that I did with an individual on Zoom, and then Suzanne is going to show you how she used it in a face-to-face program with a group of ABE learners. Also, you'll be able to identify needs and growth and comprehensibility. So we're going to ask you to identify some changes that learners have made. And finally, hopefully you'll be able to identify some of the best practices for this project.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so the first thing is, let's start out by talking about the mirroring project. What is it and why should you consider undertaking it with your group of students? Okay, so we thought the best way would be to show you an example. We're going to start by showing a short segment of a TED Talk by Dr. Atul Gawande, and he's speaking about how do we heal medicine. And so what I'd like you to do is just watch this, and then I'll tell you about the person who mirrored him and why they chose him. So go ahead.
In the last few years, we realized we're in the deepest crisis of medicine's existence due to something you don't normally think about when you're a doctor concerned with how you do good for people, which is the cost of healthcare. There's not a country in the world that now is not asking whether we can afford what doctors do. The political fight that we've developed has become one around whether it's the government that's the problem or is it insurance companies that are the problem. And the answer is yes and no. It's deeper than all of that.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you an example of a student that I worked with. I'll call him S. He's originally from Liberia. He came here to the United States to study nursing. And so he attended classes at a community college. He eventually would like to be a doctor and go back to Liberia and help his country. And so he chose Dr. Gawande to mirror. So I have to apologize. He was working with me at home and we should have had him close his closet door. So if you can just not pay attention to that and listen to him and see how closely you feel he mirrored Dr. Gawande.
In the last few years, we realized we were in the deepest crisis of medicine's existence due to something you don't normally think about when you are a doctor, concerned with how you do good for people. which is the cost of healthcare. There's not a country in the world that now is not asking whether we can afford what doctors do. The political fight that we've developed have become one around whether it's the government that's the problem, or is it insurance companies that are the problem? And the answer is yes and no. It's deeper than all of that.
Yeah, so this was on Zoom, and he was talking, well, he was talking to me, talking to the camera, imagining that he was talking to the audience. And it's interesting because when he graduated, we had a party and we got together, and he invited me to sit at the table with him and his friends from Liberia. And as he was talking to them in English, I couldn't understand what they were saying. And he kind of looked over at me and he said, "Are you understanding?" And I said, "I'm having a bit of a problem." But then, of course, when he talks to me or when he talks to somebody from this, who speaks this variety of English, then he will modify the way that he speaks. So I thought he did a great job. It looks like some people in the chat think the same. So let's go on and see, how we get to this point. So with that in mind, let me tell you a little bit more in detail about what the Mirroring Project is. First of all, it's, as you saw, imitating a native speaker, but not only the verbal language, body language as well, or a comprehensible non-native speaker of English. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later when we look at an example of a non-native speaker that one of my students mirrored. The second thing is that it's a presentation like a TED Talk, but it could also be a dialogue. So something from a movie, something from a sitcom. So there are several possibilities for what your students could do. When I taught this project at the university, it usually took about 2 to 3 hours. So I spaced it over a period of 1 to 3 weeks. And again, in our book, we lay out specifically how we did it, but I think by the end of today's presentation, you'll get an idea of what it might look like. Okay, so that's what it is in a nutshell. Now let's look at the next slide.
Okay. Oh, something to mention here is that if you're looking at points 3 and 4 here, where it takes 2 to 3 hours, a period of 1 to 3 weeks, that's just an estimation we have from Colleen's typical integration of it. But the structure of that time and how long it takes, if you do it over a full semester or however you want to do it, fit it to your curricular and learner needs. We have a friend in an ABE program down in Illinois who teaches 4 times a week, and she allots about a half an hour every couple days to do this. So don't get scared off by any of the numbers.
Okay, I was just responding to somebody in chat. So one thing is that people often use the terms mirroring and shadowing interchangeably. But as we were writing the book, we were talking about, or we wrote about the differences. There are very specific differences between them. And I've talked to Jen Foote. Maybe some of you attended her presentation through CATESOL. But anyway, mirroring on the left is, as you saw, imitating the verbal and the nonverbal communication of the person. So as you can see in the visual in the upper left-hand corner, both of those are important. And then students go through a series of analyzing, practicing, and then performing for their peers and of course their teacher. It's important that they choose a model speaker with whom they identify. And Elaine Tyrone wrote a lot about that in her section on second language acquisition. And Suzanne is going to talk a little bit more in just a minute about choosing a person. And then it's very, very important to try to communicate the original emotions and purpose of the talk. So for example, if you're looking at a TED Talk, it could be the speaker could be trying to inspire, teach, persuade. So that's all very important. But shadowing, on the other hand, at least as far as I understand it, is mainly verbal communication. So the students will repeat after the speaker and try to follow them verbally, but there's not that nonverbal component. As far as I know, there's no performance aspect. So students might be doing it on their own or in class, but not necessarily performing in front of someone else. As far as I know, it can be any model speaker. So there's not an investment in terms of finding somebody that you identify with. And then I'm not sure about focus on emotions and purpose. Maybe somebody that's more familiar with shadowing can address that. But again, I want to make it very clear that these are two different approaches that can be used. Okay, so go ahead, Suzanne.
I was on mute. So why should you consider incorporating the mirroring project into your classrooms or into your programs? One thing is that many of us teach with an integrated curriculum. So we have many aspects to our curriculum, many different skills we're teaching, and you can work the mirroring project into what you're already doing. You don't have to be teaching a speaking class or a pronunciation class. Also, it's fun and engaging for learners, in part because it is so highly contextualized through videos and the topics that the videos present that the learners are interested in. And also the videos that you use, they're not made for classroom use. They're real world, authentic speech that our learners want and really need that exposure to. So there's many reasons to integrate this into what you already do. And today we'll go through the different phases in the process, and we'll see examples of each of the phases. There's three main phases: the analysis phase, using the model, transcribing the speech, and then analyzing the speech and the nonverbals. Second phase is the mirroring phase, where the students do lots and lots of practice, and then finally perform a trial version and a final version. And the channeling phase, where students are able to apply their own words, their original content, or apply what they've learned to their own words or original content of their own. Okay. Oops. Did I skip over something?
No, you didn't. I was just going to jump in.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. You were going to do this too. My bad. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh, great. Okay, so first, the analysis phase. Choosing the model is the first part of the analysis phase. For example, we saw a few minutes ago that Colleen had a learner named S who mirrored Atul Gawande and his TED Talk. In that case, the learner chose the video. And then Colleen vetted it to make sure it was an appropriate video. And then with Colleen's support and feedback, the learner, could do much of the work in between seeing Colleen, in between the classes. She still had to do a lot of support, but he was able to do much of the work independently. And so the great thing about learner choice in this case is that it allows for maximum investment. They choose a speaker that they relate to, the content in the video, they're interested in it. Hopefully that's why they chose it. But the downside of having all of your learners choose different models is that it's more work for the teacher in terms of that vetting process, making sure everyone chose a good video, guidance and feedback. It just takes more time. And Colleen uses this approach on this side of the spectrum where all the learners choose when she works with small groups and one-on-one tutoring. And it works really well in those situations. And the students have to be pretty independent also. Not completely independent, just a little bit more independent. But on the other side of this spectrum, with the teacher choosing, you could use this in a group context where the teacher chooses one thing for the whole group. And in this case, that gives the teacher control over the content, control over the context. So that would make it easier for you to integrate it into a theme that you're already using in your classroom. It also allows, it's really nice because as the teacher, you already know ahead of time what the speaker's doing, saying. You can analyze the transcript ahead of time, that type of thing. And you can, if you have a group, bring them through the process as one. However, in a group, if the teacher chooses it and everyone has to do the same one, there's not that closeness for the learner to the person. They might not identify with the person, or they might not like the content. So it's not as learner-centered, obviously. You can also be anywhere between these two on that spectrum. One example is let's say you choose 5 videos and each individual learner gets to choose one. So you can choose along the spectrum what's best for you and your learners.
Okay, I just responded to a couple of questions in the chat. At this point, then, people are actually asking about models. And so we'd like you to participate at this point and chat out what you think teachers and learners should look for in a model. So in other words, what makes an effective model, what might make for an ineffective model. So I'll give you about 15 seconds and then I'll share some of them. And I don't know if there'll be time for all of them, all of the possibilities, but go ahead and think about that and chat it out.
So again, the prompt is, what should teachers and learners look for in a model when they're trying to choose a video?
Okay, I see one person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, whoops. Yeah, so let me share a couple of these. So Karen said uses the key prosody features, thought groups, focus words, and clear syllable stress. Yes, actually, we'll talk more about that later. The student should like the topic. Yes, not only the speaker, but what they're talking about is important. Joseph said, I try to find people of the same background as my students. I choose L1 Chinese speakers. Yes, the first time I had students do a mirroring project with a non-native speaker was because a Chinese TA of mine told me that she couldn't find a native speaker that she wanted to mirror and wanted to know if she could use a Chinese native speaker. So yeah, Patrick registered that's applicable to the student's context. Native language is the same. Some things that I would add to that are looking at the person's use of pausing, maybe finding someone who's confident, portrays confidence, speaking about something that's heartfelt. So not only that the student likes the topic, but oftentimes if the speaker feels strongly about something, that can make a difference. Connecting with the audience. So not somebody that's standing up there and just speaking, but somebody that can really establish that sense of rapport. And on the other hand, some things that might not be good are someone who speaks in a monotone, who doesn't have much nonverbal communication, maybe just stands there like a stone, maybe speaks too fast, mumbles. I can see some, yeah, somebody wrote, like John Murphy has written about, yeah, actually the first time I used a non-native speaker was because I had heard him speak at CATESOL. Marnie said, high variability phonetic training. Yeah, so lots of important things here. Okay.
One thing I'll add that I didn't think about right away when I first started doing this was that the video has to show their body.
Yes.
Yeah, so that the students can mirror the body language.
Yeah, the body and hopefully also the face.
Right, the face.
Somewhat close. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so actually, here's where we get into some more examples. I worked with a Spanish speaker who wanted to mirror someone who was also a Spanish speaker. So she chose Shakira in this speech that was given in Qatar at the WISE conference. So again, I'd like you to listen and then to chat out, in what ways is Shakira a good model to mirror? So thinking about all of the things that we've said, okay? So let's watch her.
Growing up in my country when I was around 8 years old, I remember I saw kids my age who, instead of being in school, were already working in the streets, were barefoot in the park, kids like me, whose reality was completely different than mine, only because of the circumstances into which they were born.
Okay, so I'll give you about 15 seconds again to think about it. How is she a good model to mirror? Okay, so yes, clear focus words, very important. Highly effective use of pausing. Yes, she's great. And you'll see later when my student mirrors her, how that was helpful. Marnie, yeah, clear thought groups. Clear, understandable, but still obviously not a native speaker. Good point, Marla. And actually, I think that that's important because she's a non-native speaker like my student, but which means that she's attainable and but still, you know, the student doesn't have to be native-like. So that's a really good point. She enunciates, emotion matches the content, as Marsha said, gestures, facial expression. Yes, she's very expressive in terms of nonverbal communication. Good pace, not too fast or too slow. You can see her face. So as we said, having her right on the screen, content that students can relate to. Yes, you'll see later when we talk about the channeling that is important. Yeah, and intelligible and clear speech. Okay, so yeah, the main thing I would say is everything, in addition to everything that all of you mentioned, is that she's a good model. She's a non-native speaker, which means she's attainable. And also she varies things. She varies her speed, she varies her body language, etc. Okay, so let's move on. Whoops, did we miss a slide? I think we missed a slide, Suzanne. Okay, yeah, this one here. Okay, so the next step is after students have chosen the model, then it's important to start their analysis, as we said. And so we have students start with the big picture. So who's speaking, in this case, Shakira, what is the person's role or purpose? Okay, so she's trying to persuade us of something. And then we go down to the how level. So looking at how is she trying to accomplish this in terms of rate, pausing, body language, volume, intonation, and then changes, because sometimes people will change their speed or their intonation depending on how they're feeling or what they want people to pay attention to. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And here I want you to focus on that third part, but I want to change the questions a little bit. So how does Shakira feel about her topic and her audience? So, and just to give you again, the context is that she's talking about global education. Okay, so how does she feel about her topic and her audience, and how does that impact how she speaks? So think about that as you're watching and then chat out. Okay.
Growing up in my country, when I was around 8 years old, I remember I saw kids my age who, instead of being in school, were already working in the streets, were barefoot in the park, kids like me, whose reality was completely different than mine, only because of the circumstances into which they were born.
Okay, so how does she feel? And how does that impact her speaking? Okay, so Karen, yes, excellent point. She's passionate, and that passion is expressed through clear stress on keywords. Yes. Anything else to add? How does she feel about her audience? Okay, so Marsha pities the poor conditions of children who don't have the opportunities to become educated. Yes, that comes through, that they need that opportunity. Joseph, she feels that her past experiences were unfair. Her slower speed and focus words helps convey this. Yes, yes. Also very aware of privileged circumstances under which she grew up, in contrast to those she's talking about. Yes, these are all excellent. You guys have gone beyond, you know, what I was thinking of, but they're all very, very true. Some things that I wrote is, again, the passion, and that she really engages with the audience by talking about her own story. You know, kids like me. So that's a way of connecting and engaging with the audience. And as people have mentioned, her clear thought groups, her rate, her body language really shows her emotions, how she feels about this topic that's very near and dear to her heart. And her stress and intonation highlight the key ideas and the key words that she's trying to convey. So yeah, okay, let's go on. All right, so one thing is that I want to emphasize that students don't just look at the video and mirror it, but also we spend some time talking about pronunciation features. And actually it's interesting because I've had a couple of students that didn't realize that they were supposed to do that first. For example, I'm tutoring a researcher from the Mayo Clinic, and we hadn't talked about the pronunciation features yet. And he tried mirroring this one person and he did a terrible job. And I said, oh, no, you weren't supposed to do that yet. So then we went back and we talked about pausing. We identified the pausing in the model, prominence, body language. And then he did the project again, and he did a totally different job. So one thing is that before they get to this point, students will have talked about certain pronunciation features depending on the level and the class. And I like to use this visual from Linda Grant, comparing the way that some languages or some speakers speak, where they have very much of a monotone and every syllable has the same length, like a bunch of Volkswagens in a row, whereas English is more like the bottom picture. So we've got those really quick, unstressed words that are like motorcycles, and then we've got the cars that are the lengthened syllables, and then that bus that gets that punch in the end for the focus word. And so this is what we will talk about. And with the guy from the Mayo Clinic, we focus mainly on the prominence, the thought groups, and the body language. And then of course, word stress, because that becomes important when you get to the prominent word. Okay, the next one. So the pronunciation features, again, thought groups and pausing, emphasis, and body language. Perhaps you've talked about it before, but body language will often go hand in hand with stress patterns, and especially with focus or prominence. So for example, Shakira said, "Kids like me," and she pointed to herself. I just saw in the chat, somebody asked about languages that follow the upper pattern. Japanese might be like that. Castilian Spanish might be like that. Italian might be like that. Of course, it depends on the dialect and the variety. So for example, Latin American Spanish may not be as much like that top visual. Also, some speakers, some native speakers of English may speak in a monotone without pausing. You know, it might not be exactly like that upper visual, but maybe leaning more towards that end of the spectrum. So I hope I've answered the question. Okay, so let's move on.
Colleen, would you like to move to the number 2 marrying phase? Here?
Yeah, we were going to take a break, weren't we?
We were.
We have time. Do we have time or maybe not?
Let's take 2 minutes.
Okay. All right.
So a 2-minute break, get up, run downstairs for another cup of tea, and then come right back.
Okay, since recording is in progress, we'll move on to the mirroring phase. So Suzanne, if you want to go on to the next slide. So one thing is that again, this is a whole process. You can't just ask students to imitate and expect that they're going to do a good job. Even if you've talked about the pronunciation features that you want them to focus on. So instead, a technique that I use is read, look up, and say. And basically what students do, this is kind of like, I think they might do this, that actors and actresses. So they write their transcript in large font, one thought group per line, and they mark the pronunciation features. So for example, the prominence, and then also the body language. So Suzanne, if we can go on to the next slide. So for instance, my student M, the Spanish speaker, first mirrored Michelle Obama in her speech that she gave at the Democratic National Convention in 2020. And so this was the way, well, she marked it. I put it into this nice format, but she wrote it out and identified prominent words and then wrote in body language. So for instance, Michelle said, but let's be clear, going high does not mean, okay, and when she got to the word not, she raised her eyebrows. So again, as we mentioned, the nonverbal communication often goes hand in hand with the prominence. And Deborah Hardison has done a lot of good research in that area. So I suggest that you read what she's written. So this is the first page. And then if we go to the second page, you can see this was the transcript that my student did. One thing about M is that she was very motivated to improve her comprehensibility. And so she would always do a lot. I usually suggest that students do about 7 to 10 consecutive sentences, but of course, if they want to do more, that's fine. So let's move on to the next slide where she's practicing. One thing, you'll see 3 people here. The person on the left is another ESL teacher who wanted to observe my sessions with M. M is on the bottom. She's a Spanish speaker. And one thing is that it might be hard for you to see, but she actually has her transcript in front of her computer. And so you'll see her, she'll look down and then she'll look up and she'll say it to the computer, but she'll try to speak one thought group at a time, making the prominent word prominent and then adding the body language. So let's take a look.
But let's be clear. Going high does not mean putting on a smile and saying nice things. When confronted by viciousness and cruelty, going high means taking the harder path. It means scraping and clawing our way to do that mountaintop. Going high means standing fierce against hatred, while remembering we are one nation under God. And if we want to survive, we've got to find the way to live together and work together across our differences.
As you can see, the 2 teachers there are so proud of what she did. She did such a fantastic job. So that's the read, look up, and say. So this is a way of scaffolding what students do again. Mm-hmm. So, and one of the nice things about the TED.com videos is that even before doing this, students can look at the video itself and practice with it. And if you've ever used TED videos, you can press the same thought group over and over and over again so students can practice. Okay, so Suzanne is going to tell you about the trial version.
Okay, so after the students have practiced quite a lot with the look up and say, and just practicing with the transcript. Finally, you'll have a trial version, which I think of as a dress rehearsal for the final performance. So here, the first bullet point, learners can perform in front of small groups or perhaps on Flipgrid, which is a web and app tool that enables learners to record themselves, and then they can get other teachers and fellow learners to post comments. Many of you probably already know about Flipgrid. So they could use Flipgrid, they could perform in front of small groups or perform in front of the whole class. And the second point here is that it's very valuable, of course, to give feedback. And we have some rubrics in a resource folder that we'll give you a link to at the end. But both the teacher and peers can use rubrics to provide feedback. You'll have choices. You don't have, the teacher and the students don't have to be using the same rubric. One can be simplified, but we've found that that's very helpful for the students, both peers and the speaker. And again, we have some examples in our resource folder. And then finally, if you can, record the trial version, because first of all, you won't be able to catch everything in the real moment as the teacher to give feedback. So it'll be a nice chance for you to look again and give more thorough feedback. Also, the student can use the recording for self-reflection or self-feedback. You know, the students can be using their phones if they're working in small groups, etc. But that's a very important piece.
And I just wanted to add here too that since many of you are in California, where Hollywood is, that students sometimes have a lot of fun working like in a triad. So one person is the director, one person is the speaker, and one person is the videographer. And so this can be really fun because they can practice over and over again. And it's really beneficial because the other members of the triad can give feedback in a non-threatening way. Okay, so then finally we have the final version, the performance. And so again, it's very similar to the trial version that Suzanne just mentioned. The main difference is that in the final version, there's a focus on the overall performance, including that emotion and body language. So this is where we want to bring everything together that they've been working on. In the trial version, they might be doing the mechanics, but in the final version, the emotion, everything is there, the whole package. Okay, so let's look. So here's my student M again, and she's mirroring Shakira. This is her final version, and I'll talk to you. There's something interesting that happens here. I'll comment on it in just a minute. Go ahead.
Growing up in my country, when I was around 8 years old, I remember I saw kids who, instead of being in school, they were already working in the streets. Kids like me. They were barefoot in the park. So kids like me who
Okay, so let's see, where are we?
I forgot.
Whose reality was completely different. Yeah.
Yeah, whose reality was completely different than mine, only because of the circumstances into which they were born. It was really hard for me to accept that something so unjust didn't have a solution. There has to be something that could be done.
Yeah. Okay, so you noticed that she forgot a line. She was doing the final version, and but that's okay. That happens sometimes. I tell students just ad lib or keep going. And and she had done it a couple of times, and I didn't want her to do it again because she was really capturing the emotion that Shakira had, I felt like. So, and one thing that I might have told her is to stand up. She was sitting down, and Shakira in the original was standing. So that might have helped as well. But anyway, so that's the final version. But I think what's really interesting is, let's move on, Suzanne.
Okay.
Is people asked me whenever they would see the mirroring project, they would say, well, this is all fine and good, but is there a carryover into free speech? And so at that point, we came up with a channeling phase, and I'll explain that and show you an example. So for the channeling phase, the learner writes a new script, which is short, again, not more than, 7 to 10 sentences. Although again, my Spanish speaker, wrote something that was really, really long. And in that case, the learner tries to be the model speaker. And one thing is that this is a little bit abstract. And so having an example to show students is a good idea. Now that I have and I have some others, I can show them. And once again, they practice the channeling, and then they perform it. And let's see, before we see this, this video is a little bit low. It's a little bit hard to hear. So if you can turn up the volume on your computer and be aware to listen, I'll explain first. Wait a minute, Suzanne. So yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to set up the slide. So again, channeling is speaking in a way in which you try to be the speaker whom you've mirrored. And my student from Central America, this was at the time when there were many migrant caravans coming from Central America to the US. And people would ask her, what are these migrant caravans all about? Why are they coming? And so she was tired of hearing this and having to explain. So she gave a presentation explaining that. So here it is. As you watch it, again, I'm going to have you participate. I'd like you to think about Shakira and what she said, and now chat out, how is trying to be Shakira? So in what ways is this the same?
In recent years, people often asked me about the caravans from Central America and why do kids come to the United States by themselves. This is a topic that touched me deeply because I'm a mother and because I'm from Central America. In the past 5 years, thousands of people, including kids and teenagers, started to walk miles and miles, some of them with only flip-flops on their feet and plastic bags in their hands.
Okay, so 15 seconds, how is trying to be Shakira? Okay. Okay, so yes, Joseph says good focus words and nonverbal cues during them, good connection to a past experience. Yes, one thing is that she needs to speak louder. She has some health issues that prevent her from speaking loudly, but I think with that in mind, you can still hear her focus words and you can see her nonverbals helping with that. Pacing and pausing is very similar in some of the word stress. Yes, just like Shakita, she had good pacing here. Christy said wording. Yeah, there are some similarities in terms of what she talked about and what Shakita did. Marla, similar pausing and gestures. Yes, very similar. Marsha, hand gestures, shows concern and facial expression. Yes, you can really tell that this is something that's very near and dear to her heart. And I feel like that came through very well. The emotional involvement. Yes, fantastic. Relating the topic to herself, just like Shakita, connecting story to herself. So yeah, so this is the end of the project with an individual. At this point, Suzanne is going to take us into how to do the mirroring project with a group. So go ahead.
Right. So as you've seen in that beautiful example, Colleen's learners can often analyze the speech on their own, but many people and the learners I tend to work with, they need more support. So you could do the mirroring project partially or completely as a group. And coming up in the next slides, I'll show you a group of ABE learners. They're intermediate, running from low intermediate to high intermediate, figuring this out with more support from me. But first, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. I said they're intermediate level. Also, I'm doing this class as a demonstration. So they only saw me a couple of times, and that comes into it, into the analysis of the actual teaching later. But just so you know that, I'm not their day-to-day teacher. This is the worksheet that the learners will have in front of them in the video. It doesn't have the red and blue marks, but it's a TED Talk about making conversation with strangers. And the learners and I had previously worked on listening for the pauses in speech. So figuring out where those thought groups are and the pauses. Let's see. And then, so here, we had already worked on pausing. Now, we're going to work on prominence. Okay, so that's where you will step into the class. You can note that I try to use learner-friendly language. We refer to thought groups as chunks and prominence as the strong word or the important word. And you can watch here for how I walk a group through the concepts using that kind of friendly language. Every chunk in English has a super strong word, okay? A super strong word. And right now, let's listen to each chunk and listen for the strong word, okay? Does everyone have a highlighter? Highlight the strong word in the chunk. First chunk is strangers, right? There's only one word. So which word will we highlight? Strangers, right. So go ahead and highlight strangers. Strangers. Okay. Now they are everywhere. One word is strong. Let's listen.
They are everywhere.
You think everywhere? Yes. So highlight everywhere. Okay, so as you can see, I used methods that you all probably use when teaching other skills or pronunciation skills. You scaffold little by little and really co-construct that information with the learners. Also, you and your learners, again, can use meta language like what I used, or you can create your own meta language together, as long as they understand what the meta language means. So after we marked thought groups and prominence, we wanted to move into associating the body language to the text. And we use some of the same types of instructional strategies. So here we go, one more.
Body movements. When does she move her arms? When does she move her arms? With what words?
Strangers, they are everywhere. And we've always been told, don't talk to strangers.
When does she move her hands? Right. Say that again. Everywhere. Opportunity, right. Yep. Look at your paper. When does she move her arms? The highlighted words, right.
Okay, so the learners are making that discovery or linking those two things together. And we really want them to kind of understand that on that level. And only after they have that discovery point of the language and the body language going together, then we have them practice and doing it themselves. So here's a third clip.
Strangers.
Strangers.
Okay, everybody. Strangers. Strangers. Again, strangers. Good. Ready?
They are everywhere.
Good. They are everywhere. Good.
So as you can see, they're going along with the body language, trying that out, and we're still just doing it all as a group. And then after we'd done that a little bit, we moved into intonation. And of course, every thought group has its own intonation contour. So we practiced a bit listening for the pitch rise, the pitch fall, and using a lot of gestures for that. I'll show you this and then I have a couple of comments on it, but here's them practicing a little bit with intonation.
This. Okay.
They are everywhere.
They are everywhere. They are everywhere. So bring it up on every and then down. They are everywhere. They are everywhere. Bring it up on always. And we've always been told, don't talk to strangers. Good. Let me see you again. And we've always been told, don't talk to strangers. Good. Where does my hand go up? Beg. But I beg to differ. But I beg to differ. Good. Show me again. But I beg to differ. Good. But I beg to differ. But I beg to differ. Good.
So the students needed a lot of practice, really trying to make that variation in their voice happen. And I often have to, and I did here, to really exaggerate it and make it a little slower than normal. And then we start speeding it up. But again and again, lots of repetition. And something else I'll say here, this clip makes me think about, again, that this all happened in one afternoon because it was a demonstration. And had I been their actual classroom teacher, I wouldn't have moved on from body language and prominence until we'd practiced that for a couple of more days. So they're doing a really good job, but I'll just mention that it's all at once, and it might be a little bit overwhelming for them at this point. And then after we put a bunch of that together, they got to work in small groups to practice. Here's just a small clip of them practicing.
Don't talk to stranger. That means don't talk to stranger. But I beg to differ. Every stranger come with an opportunity.
Every stranger comes with an opportunity.
Good.
See, up and down.
Yeah. An opportunity to learn something.
Okay, so this is their first time trying it out by themselves. And you can definitely tell, especially with that first table of learners, that they aren't quite getting it. They think they're doing it, but they need the feedback that they're not quite there to get more variation in their voices. And well, yes, the more variation in their voices and really have those prominent words pop. So don't be shy about giving lots of feedback and as the process goes on. Also, something else I would do if I had this to do over again is I would have them stand up while they were practicing. I think, like Colleen was saying, it brings another energy to the performance, and I think it really helps them step into being another character. So those are a couple things. I would spread it out further, and I would have them stand up. So that's just a quick demonstration of how you could use this with a group. And that brings us just on time to our final thoughts and resources. So some of our take-home messages, consider the choice of models for your context. And a lot of you were saying that in the chat too. What makes a very good model and what doesn't? And involve the learners as much as you can. Remember, it's a process. Lots of practice is needed. And the channeling piece, like Colleen and Elaine Tyrone and Darren Lescott are telling us in their upcoming book, channeling is absolutely essential to bring this into spontaneous speech. Some other take homes, we have a resource folder. And actually the link, I believe Marsha has or Colleen does, we'll put it in the chat. We'll also see if we can email it to you.
That's okay. You could, yeah, make sure you give it to me and I'll send it out to everybody.
Okay, that's great.
Great, thank you.
What you'll really like in these handouts is that not only do we have kind of just the rundown of what the mirroring project is, but we have video ideas and links to the videos and transcripts that go with those videos. You know, a handful of videos, maybe 7 videos. We have examples of everything Colleen went through, samples of rubrics. And for those of you new to pronunciation teaching, a handy little definition sheet, excuse me. There are tons of resources out there. A couple that we mentioned during the presentation, Well Said and Clear Speech are nice teacher and student books. Of course, Marsha's The Pronunciation Doctor website. That is, if you don't already know, for learners, but even if your learners can't use it, there's lots of good info in there for teachers. And then the Baruch College website to learn more about pronunciation. And the link to the video I was showing you is this last link right here, and it will also be in the handout folder. And that's it. We're just so happy to have been asked to come and have you all here with us. Are there any questions to wrap up the session? Oh, thank you so much, everyone.
So, don't be afraid. We are the top speaker. So go ahead and open up your mic and speak out if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment to our wonderful presenters.
I'll just mention here to Joseph that you will get a link to the resources folder from Marsha, our lovely host.
Suzanne,
Yes.
Marnie wants us to go back to the resources.
This slide?
Marnie, is that the right one? Yes, she's nodding.
Those will also be in the resource folder.
Yeah, and thanks also, I wanted to say to Marsha for inviting us, for giving us the opportunity to present today, and for CATESOL as well. So
it's our pleasure. It's absolutely our pleasure to have you here. I think we learn so much from you and see the whole process. That's what's really so nice is not, we have mentioned the word mirroring before. We've talked a little, maybe have little snippets of summaries about it, but to really see how you put it into action, taking the students through the different steps. And you let us know that it is a process, just like learning to speak more clearly is not an overnight thing. It's not that thing that you can learn to change your accent in 28 days. No. You have to really work at it and go through the analysis parts, listening parts, really figure out trial and error parts, getting feedback from the experts parts, and putting it all together. And this is especially important when we're working with learners who want not just to be able to speak better while they're on their phone, but speak better and more clearly and more intelligibly and more comfortably, effectively in face-to-face types of situations. That learners there's so much for a learner to think about, like, what is the vocabulary word? How do I put the words in a sentence? And then open my mouth and then try to think of all these things. And we have to think about our face. We have to think about gestures. We have to think about our posture, all of those things. So what you have done with the mirroring project can be of great value to not only our non-native learners, mark me well, but a lot of native speakers who not too effective in their presentation skills. So that's all.
That's right. A lot of it is presentation skills. Yeah. I saw someone had a hand up named Sharon.
Sharon had her hand up.
I think so, but
yeah, I kind of changed my mind because I thought maybe
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I thought it was sort of a stupid question.
Oh no,
no such thing as a stupid question.
Yeah, I know this works because I've done this, so I know it works. But I'm just wondering about, it's sort of the same thing when you answer the phone. Your voice is a little bit different. You have the phone voice. When people are giving TED Talks, it's not completely natural. It's not, they're speaking for an audience. And so I don't even know how to word this. So I know this works, but can you say anything about how they're using a model that's not 100% natural?
Well, yeah, one thing is that I've had students do scenes from movies, and I guess one could argue those are not authentic either. But there's a scene from Spider-Man, and we actually have the transcript as well. And it's where it's from Spider-Man 1, so it goes back quite a few years. Spider-Man is talking to Uncle Ben and something like, "Thanks for the ride, Uncle Ben." And Uncle Ben says, "Well, we need to talk." And anyway, it's Hollywood, but it's very natural. And Janet Goodwin, who's from California, she's done a lot with having her students, her ITAs, I don't know if she's still doing it, but she was years ago, having them do scenes from sitcoms. She did a lot, had her students do a lot from Friends and things like that. So it's not only TED Talks. TED Talks is one thing, but depending on the purpose, you could choose anything. But I would suggest just be careful, because there are some scenes and some speakers that just aren't appropriate. So years ago when we presented at CATESOL, we talked about on Friends that, what was her name, was Monica, was not a good model. I don't know if I would still agree with that, but I hope that that answers. It's more than just TED Talks.
So another thing that I think it could also bring up in a discussion of registers, of how you speak in different situations.
Yes.
And in selecting your models, you can talk about, well, what is the situation? What is the relationship between the people if it's conversational? Or what is the scene in which this person is speaking? Is it formal or informal? Those sorts of things are, useful to our students who, it's something that they probably don't think about, right?
Right.
Because they probably just think of, oh, I've got to learn English. How do I say when all those things? So those sorts of things can be brought up as a possible discussion in determining how this scene will go on. And you're talking about a small snippet, right?
Yes.
How long are the pieces of model video that you ask students to choose?
Well, I suggest 7 to 10 consecutive sentences, or around 30 seconds to a minute.
Right,
But
it's short, right? 30 seconds to a minute is short, right?
Yes, it's short, but it's long for them, especially if they have to memorize it.
They have to memorize it. They have to analyze it. All of those things about, that we do about analyzing, where are the pauses, where are the chunks, beginning and end, what are the focus words, all of those things. That takes time. So it's really a good idea to have them do short things. I know that sometimes when I have an advanced speaker, somebody who is very fluent, but what you're trying to bring them down to something more manageable, and you ask them to write something and they go, and I'm going like, nope, chop, 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 chop. We're only going to take this 25% of what you wrote. And we're also going to break it up, because there's some advanced students who know how to write well, where they're embedding their sentences in, they have complex sentence structure. And I'm saying, okay, but when we're doing a speech, when we're doing oral presentation, we typically use simple sentences and maybe some connectors.
Yes, I'm working with.
Yeah. So there's a whole idea of written versus oral, and there's an idea about what situations you would be speaking in. I mean, it's just rich.
Yes, I was going to say I'm working with another student from Ethiopia who's in nursing school, and that's one of the things that we've been working on, because she's used to writing these long sentences that are appropriate for written communication, but now she also has to give oral presentations, and she wants to just memorize everything that she's written. And I'm saying, no, we need to break this down. You need to make it your own speech. And she does so much better. She's so much more comprehensible when she doesn't write down what she's going to say word for word and memorize it. When she just, I tell her, speak from your heart. You know this, explain it the way you would, maybe like speaking to a patient. You're not going to pull out something and read it. So yes, somebody else, I think it was Heather, mentioned my case advising sessions. So yes, getting back to your point, Marsha, that it depends on the register, it depends on the situation. And so it can be really instructive to have students do several mirroring projects and say, okay, now this time we're going to look at presentation speech. This time we're going to look at informal speech, and maybe compare and contrast. how that speech is different depending on the purpose, the role, etc. So yeah, great point. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks very much to our audience who have been great in participating and answering questions and putting comments about what we've been seeing and viewing. Great work, Colleen and Suzanne. So nice to have you here from Michigan. I'd like to remind everyone else that we have our next event on June 3rd. And also we have a little newsletter. Patrick, you want to say something about that for email updates? Are you here, Patrick?
Oh, sure. Yes, I am. Sure, Marsha. I just pasted in the link into the chat. So basically, even if you're not a CATESOL member, you can sign up to receive updates on our professional development events. Most of them are online, and also events that we put up at conferences. And you can sign up for that by filling out a little Google form that I just put in the chat.
So that's in the chat, and you will be able to keep up with what great stuff we have coming up for you. In the meantime, let's give a big hand to our presenters for today's event. And I will be sending out to you more of the things afterwards, the things that they would like to share with us. Thanks so very much. I think now